So, Marietta, thank you so much for finding the time to talk today.
Sure.
As a specialist in the pharma sector, what are your clients asking you at the moment?
Well, when it comes to investments in the pharmaceutical and healthcare sector, I think the key question people are asking or should be asking really fall into three different buckets. The first relates to opportunities arising as a direct result of COVID. The second is the operational resilience of the leading player during the shutdown. And the third is the pricing power of those players in a post-corona world. And I think there's probably not enough focus on the latter part. So let me just elaborate a little bit on each one of those. On the first point, opportunities arising directly from the virus, there's obviously various companies working on vaccines, treatments, diagnostics, healthcare equipment, and consumables. And I think potentially for some very small companies, there could be very significant upside or benefit. But I wouldn't get too carried away with the opportunity for the blue chip companies, because I think there are still lots of open questions about the efficacy of the various vaccines and treatments, how much of a recurring opportunity it's really going to be, and also what the pricing power is going to be in the context of the current crisis. The second point on the operational resilience, I think these companies are obviously far more resilient than, let's say, a pub chain, but the disruption is still affecting them. And so questions that get asked a lot are along the lines of, can the sales reps actually detail drugs to the doctors? Can the patients actually see their physicians and get started on treatment? Can the companies actually produce and ship the drugs? Is the FDA and or the other regulators working as normal? Can you carry out clinical trials as planned? And that's maybe one of the most important factors actually to watch going forward. And then just finally on the third point, pricing power in a post-corona world. I think, in the pharmaceutical space, we've had fear of pricing pressure for over 10 years. And some of that has actually already panned out. It's always been manageable because there's really no mechanism for most payers to cut price dramatically. But the flip side is that there's also no mechanism for massive price hikes. And so if, let's say, we get a lot of unemployment in the US, you could have negative channel mix, or what really my biggest concern relates to a hyperinflationary scenario. If the central banks basically go full Weimar and you wake up one morning and you realize a cup of coffee costs $50, can you actually charge millions of dollars for a single cancer treatment because of that? And I think that is potentially something that should just really be on investors' radars.
How are you finding you're having to adjust the way that you look at the sector?
Well, I think there's actually just lots of focus on COVID-19 within the existing framework. There will, I'm sure, going to be a lot of focus on COVID-19 at the Q1 results stage, because all the companies were still quite vague or didn't really know what was going to happen at the full year stage. But I think they might just be able to put slightly more detail onto it at the Q1 stage. I think in terms of the markets overall, I think everybody's just expecting the current turmoil to last, and the IPO window is probably not going to open for a lot of companies unless they say they have a COVID cure.
How useful have you found your CFA training in sort of being able to sort of frame some of the problems that you're looking at and then sort of getting to grips with them?
It's a very difficult question because, I got my charter so long ago and I've been involved with CFA UK for so long that it's almost impossible now to actually separate out any effects. I would say two things. One is that the comprehensive analytical framework that are obtained through the training over the years is just really helping tremendously in terms of imposing a discipline. And also my volunteer work on the various committees in recent years has been really helpful in terms of understanding the ramifications of any major disruptions on the various stakeholders and the implications in particular for corporate reporting.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier the clinical trials and whether they can go ahead as planned. I guess the suggestion is that you think that's going to be more difficult than people may be anticipating, but could you elaborate on that a tiny bit?
Yeah, I think overall that the market is probably a little bit overly concerned over the short-term negative impact and disruption and potentially underestimating the midterm impact. I do think, well, patients diagnosed with a severe illness, they will still need to get treated. And the clinical trials that are well underway now, they can probably carry through to completion. But we have heard some pharmaceutical companies say that they have slowed enrollment or halted enrollment in some clinical trials that are not absolutely crucial. We'll have to see about initiation of future clinical trials. I think there is a risk that potentially some of the midterm news flow could be delayed. Some midterm drug launches could be delayed. Also, depending on how the regulatory agencies will actually work, how much capability they have available, whether they can actually travel to do site inspections and so forth. So I think that's just one thing that we should monitor very carefully to make sure that there is enough flow into the pipelines to sustain growth rates in the mid and long term.
And any final words of advice for other investment professionals at the moment?
Oh, that's a very difficult one. I think. I think you just need to sort of rethink the whole world and think how pharmaceuticals are going to fit into that world. And I would just really encourage everybody to look very much at the subject of pricing power and look at various scenarios where margin structures in various industries have shifted and inflationary events happen in some sectors of the economy, deflationary events might happen in other sectors, and what would that really potentially do to your pharmaceutical investment thesis? Is it still robust if they do get hit by inflationary pressures that they can't pass on?